Hi, I'm Mike Peel from ManDevCon. I'm here for another AMA with Jim White from Dell. We're going to be talking about Android Espresso today, so we're really excited about that. But first off, why should we be talking to Jim in the first place? So Jim, what is your expertise in Android and why are we talking about Espresso today?
Yeah, Mike, thanks. Why are we talking about Espresso? If you are building Android applications, you're probably very familiar with the fact that it can be difficult to build those applications on the multiple form factors and multiple types of devices we have to address. And while we have things like JUnit available to us in any Java environment, to include Android, it's that user interface testing that is particularly difficult. And so what Espresso allows us to do is more easily test the user interface portions of our Android apps without having to get into a lot of the guts and the details of the application. It's not exactly white box testing, but it does allow us to test in a way that a user would kind of test our application. That is, find something on the screen, exercise it, see if its results are exactly the type of thing we would expect to see on the screen. So the way that Google likes to pitch it is espresso testing is testing like a user would test, and that's its purpose.
Great. So what's your background in Android?
Yeah, my background, I've been doing Android for about 6 or so years on and off. As I am with Dell right now, as many of you are probably aware. Dell sells everything from big boxes to little boxes, I like to say. But I've also been in the consulting business prior to joining Dell for about 15 years, where I helped write many different applications, some for groups like a major retailer up in the Midwest for hardware, as well as things like business incentive applications that you'll find out there in the Google Store today.
Great. So hold on one second. I'll be right back with you. So how does Espresso essentially improve the testing workflow? Where were we before this, and what is it helping it resolve?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And in fact, would you mind if I share my screen here and just kind of bring up one quick thing here?
Sure.
Let's see here if I can find it. There we go. Let's see. Do I probably need to poke here? Okay. Yeah. Pop that up. So hopefully everybody can see this. But as I mentioned, it's kind of how would users test their application, find a screen or a widget they want to test, interact with it, and then check the results. That's the bottom line behind Espresso. And what that really means is it makes it a lot simpler, as I mentioned, to use Espresso as compared to other unit testing types of facilities that we might have with our Android applications. And one of the things that I really like about this environment as well, having used a lot of other particular types of testing environments, is you don't have to know a lot about things like activities and the view details in order to be able to test the application. In particular, in some of the organizations that I've been, and maybe some of the organizations that you folks are participating in out there, the developers and the QA people aren't always the same people. As a developer, you obviously want to test your apps, but then oftentimes the apps go to other people to look at, to give it that QA approval. They don't always have or want to have all the knowledge of what's going on underneath the cover. So things like activities and views, those are things that you need minimal knowledge of in order to be able to test the app. And then synchronization. One of the difficulties I've found is you've got to have lots of weights and time cycles inside of your tests in order to be able to test applications outside of Espresso. That's built into Espresso, so you don't have to put a lot of that kind of coding into your unit test, which just makes for a difficult testing apparatus episode, not to mention having to put in lots of those weights. You usually have to put in excessive weights in order to get things accomplished, so the tests run a lot longer. So it's meant to be simple. It's meant to kind of black box things a little bit. And then on top of that, it's a lot faster. In fact, compared to things like Robodium, it's about 3 times faster than Robodium out there. So again, if speed is of the utmost, and for most of us as developers and QA teams, who wouldn't like to see things run about 3 times faster than other systems we can use out there? And then beyond that, there's just a lot of other capabilities in terms of things like reliability, durability, ease to set up, built right into things like our Android Studio environment and the SDK manager that make using Espresso one heck of a lot easier compared to some of the alternatives. And yes, you could still use JUnit 3 and 4. In fact, Espresso is built on top of that. And then there are some other fine tools out there, some open source as well as some commercial tools, things like Robodium and Roboelectric that many people who are involved in Android have used. But when it gets to testing that user interface, at least from my background, from my opinion, it just provides for a lot of ease in use, speed, and making the user testing experience one heck of a lot sharper than what some of these other tools have provided in the past. So in a nutshell, Mike, and to others, that's essentially the reason why I would hope that you'd be kind of looking at this and taking a look, hopefully, at joining us for the NDevCon coming up in a couple of months, get into more deep dives into that.
So essentially, by the way that Espresso works, if you were to test it on your own, you would have to program in how long you'd have to wait for the button to load, right? So this is eliminating that, and it's not testing whether the button functions until it loads.
Yeah, good question. The idea behind a lot of the older unit tests is you had to essentially write code, first of all, know where you were in the system and to kind of measure what user interface was being displayed. And that required you to essentially wait for the underpinnings of Android to function and display the widgets, know and see that they've been displayed, and then exercise them. Espresso eliminates those previous steps. You don't have to wait for the screen to load. You're not waiting. You don't have to programmatically wait for the screen to load. You don't programmatically have to figure out what's on the screen. Espresso takes care of that for you. So what you're doing is essentially just exercising those widgets as they appear. So you're focused in on doing things like poking on buttons, not trying to figure out, well, what is actually displayed right now. And that's another good part of it. When you look at user interfaces after you've written the code, you really don't want to think about what are the names of and the identifiers of widgets. You just want to be able to say, poke this button, poke the find me button, and have it work.
So that's a great leap in testing efficiency, because you would program, I guess, longer wait times just to make sure you didn't get it wrong beforehand, whereas now it's just, as soon as the button loads, you got it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Not to mention the fact that Google obviously built into Espresso a lot of time-saving features to, looking at the competition out there, things like Robodium and Roboelectric, if you want to think of them as competition, built in a lot of time savings just to try to optimize how those tests run.
So Espresso runs on a basic formula for testing. It's broken up into 3 parts. Could you explain that?
Yeah, great question. In fact, let me kind of pull up a next slide here and make sure I'm still sharing here. Yeah, there we go. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. So yeah, essentially when you look at any particular unit test in Android, it's about, first of all, finding the particular component that you want to test. So for example, going out there and determining that we're on a particular view and not so much looking at it from a widget standpoint or an identifier standpoint, but in this case, for example, looking at what's on the screen in terms of, is the about text being displayed. Once we've got that text displayed, then we need to be able to click on it or perform some sort of action on it. So find it, if you will.
Jim, are you trying to screen share right now?
Because yep, am I not sharing? Okay,
nope.
Hang on, sorry. Switching between things here too quickly, I think. Let me get out of this. Come on, system. Happens when you give a software engineer too many tools to work with. There we go. Okay. Okay, I think we're
Yep.
sharing. Yep.
Oh,
No?
yeah.
Okay.
It just switches to me when I talk, so.
Okay. So hopefully we're still sharing there. So the idea is that first off, we want to be able to find the particular thing you want to interact with on the screen. So here's a line of code that does that. The next thing you want to do is interact with it or perform some sort of action on that particular widget, if you will, or a piece of text, what have you. Here you can see the perform in that same line of code. Once you've done the find and you've done some sort of performing of some sort of action, next thing you want to do is usually want to check that the results or the data being displayed as a result of your action are actually the way you intended them to be. So you want to use a set of what are called ham crust matchers to check, for example, to see if something is displayed. For example, a message is displayed, or maybe another button is now displayed, or for that matter, maybe the whole view is changed and a whole different series of widgets are displayed. So it boils down to doing things pretty simply in those three step fashion. Find what you're looking for, perform some actions on it, and check it. Again, Google says just like a user would do, right? If you picked up an app and somebody says, check out, make sure that app works, you'd say, well, what do you mean by making sure that app works? You'd say, well, can you find the go button? Can you interact with the go button? And then what happens once the go button got pushed? Did it display the right text, for example? So just exactly the way a user would expect to interact with things.
So just a general question, the importance of user interface and how it leads to user experience. Would you be able to, I guess, take a leap and describe how the unique challenges for Android in that arena?
Run that one by me one more time, Mike. I didn't quite catch the first part of what you meant there.
All right, so the importance of user interface design for your app. Like it's essentially is the way the user experiences your app. So just how does Espresso help in that? What are some leaps that Android has made recently that have improved user interface design in general?
Yeah, I think that is another part, I think, of application development in the Android space that has created a great ecosystem, and the reason why people love the newer forms of Android, especially when we get into things like Marshmallow. There's a lot richer user interface design there, but it also has created a lot of complexity for us as developers. If you think of the widget sets that we have available to us now, if you think of the layouts that we have available, and all the complexities about the action bars, no action bars, hamburger menus, all those kinds of things, it has made for some difficulty in trying to develop tests around that, especially when the form factors of all the different devices can require us to almost have to write dozens and dozens of tests for each little piece of the UI. Espresso can help out with that as well. Again, you're interacting with what is being displayed on the screen. You're not looking for particular widgets. You're not looking for by identifier or by some sort of programming artifact. So the user interface testing, again, comes down to what is it that the user is going to see and interact with. That's how we want you to start to think about interacting from a test perspective with your application. So I find it to be it correlates really well, right? What the user sees and what the user experience is very similar to now what we see from a testing perspective, or how we think about tests and what needs to be tested. So I think it helps to align those and simplify when we think about all the various form factors, sizes, and shapes of Android devices we have to run on.
How much is form factor and fragmentation in general a challenge for user interface design? Or has Marshmallow and Lollipop before it and material design started to simplify that?
Yeah, I think it is with Android as a whole, and we can even leave outside the discussion of various versions of Android. Just Android as a whole is becoming an extremely diverse platform. it's no longer thinking about just your phone. It's tablets, it's wearables, it's getting into the IoT spaces with things like Brillo coming on board. So just in hardware and devices alone, the interactions are becoming much more complex. And now put on top of that, back to the whole versions of Android, that just amplifies that whole fragmentation issue even more. So I think it is getting much more complex to test systems. And without a good quality app, as we know today, it's not like in early days of Android where, hey, if you could create the APK file and get it up to the store, nobody really complained. We're way beyond that now, right? Applications are very much measured by how well they perform, how well they do, and how well they look. And how well they do and how well they look, a lot of that comes down to good QA processes and having things in place that really can exercise against all those form factors. So I think there again, Espresso really helps out to try to address the multiple form factors that, frankly, yes, you can do in something like a JUnit, but boy, you're going to be having as much code in something like JUnit as you would in the actual application itself. In fact, probably even more so to address all those form factors.
As much as Espresso is able to streamline things much better than you were able to in the past, are there any deficits to the way it's laid out? Are there any improvements you'd like to see in it in the future that you think they could tackle?
Yeah, I think it certainly made things better, but are there some, let's call them idiosyncrasies that we have to deal with, as you will find in almost any environment? And yes, there are. There are some complexities in the Android environment that still require us to do or have workarounds, if you will. There's still some things, for example, that I find that Android Espresso doesn't test well. Going between screens, if you're going from activity A to activity B, Android's going to have some difficulty with that. It's really meant to test one user interface at a time. Some people would say that's a good practice, and it is, but it also, we all know that there's some things in the transition you may want to kind of measure or test that it doesn't do well. There are some little idiosyncrasies you'll find in that unit tests don't always run completion the same way every time, even on the same device. There are some obvious issues, let's call them, frankly, bugs, probably still in Espresso, that it doesn't require us to maybe measure time on the UI like we'd have to do with JUnit, but every once in a while it'll miss. In fact, one of my favorite annotations in Espresso nowadays is one called flaky test, where essentially you mark a test as being one of those tests that's just going to hit a spot in the application where, for whatever reason, it's just not going to run exactly the same way in terms of timing and activation as it would every time. And so, yeah, there are some things of that nature. We'd like to see some of that, I think, come down a little bit and be a little bit more stable in terms of being able to know that the unit tests are going to activate and exercise the same way each and every time through the same set of code each and every time. So we'll get there, and it's certainly better than it was. But yeah, it's not like exercising, for example, maybe your old Windows application that used to test many years ago with lots of different tools, and they all activated pretty much the same way.
So when building applications, there sometimes feature creep becomes a problem. Is there anything in Espresso that helps you, I guess, navigate to specific functions of your app that you're trying to test?
Yeah, one of the things I always go back when I think about any kind of testing is I kind of go back to, for those who are familiar with Martin Fowler and some of his edicts about testing, is that, when a test smells bad, that's probably when the code smells bad and when things are a bit too complex, and to use your vernacular there, Mike, when feature creep might have come in play and now all of a sudden you're trying to put everything and the God button on the same screen. That's a pretty good smell test, right? So when I find that things like my Espresso tests are getting to be too big, too complex, and I'm having to do lots of special things to kind of work around and exercise the UI, that gives me a little bit of pause. All right, we've all been there where we've seen those UIs where at first glance you might think on one screen, boy, I have the power to do everything on the screen. Then you realize, oh my gosh, everything is on the screen. I can't find anything. So I won't say that Espresso does anything explicitly to maybe help prevent the feature creep or to really guide you through good practices and how to put together UI and design. But a long, ugly test is probably a first indicator, or maybe one of the indicators at least, that gives you an indication that this probably is a UI that needs to have a little bit of review to make sure that we're really satisfying requirements, but at the same time providing a system that people understand well.
Great. So any final words? Just wrap it up for Espresso today.
Yeah, I think the one thing I guess I can encourage people to do to wrap up is give it a try. It's already built into your Android Studio environment. And another one of the positives that I find about Espresso is you don't have to do lots of laborious work to get it up and running. And I've always told the clients I've worked with, give it a shot because it's free, it's there, and I think you'll find it to be a step above some of the other UI testing facilities that you may have been familiar with. And if you don't like it, hey, at least it didn't cost anything and it didn't take much to get it up and running to give it a shot.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Excited to see you at AndevCon coming up in Santa Clara, December 1st through 3rd. For the viewers that stayed on, we're going to be reposting this video on the website, and you'll be able to sign up for potential free pass to AndevCon. And we'd like to see you at the show too. I know Jim is excited to see you, and thank you for joining us today.
Mike, thank you, and thanks to all the viewers and listeners. Look forward to seeing everybody out there in Santa Clara.
Thanks again.
You bet.